Good evening everybody, and welcome to the Dali Museum. It's great to see so many people here tonight for a very, very special talk that we have arranged as part of the Strip Bare and Bathed exhibition, an exhibition about conservation, and the great opportunity that we had to work with Rustin Levenson and her conservators to prepare and clean 4 of our most important paintings in the collection. Let me tell you a little bit about our speaker tonight, and we will get started. Rustin Levenson is the president and founder of the New York and Miami Rustin Levenson and Associates Conservation Company. She has her BA from Wesley's College, her diploma in painting conservation from the Fogg Art Museum and Harvard University. She has was part of the conservation staff at the Fogg Museum a while ago, and then after that the Canadian Conservation Institute, then the National Gallery of Canada, then the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She's a co-author with art historian Andrea Kirsch of Seeing Through Paintings, Physical Examination Art Historical Studies, and she's also written chapters for The Expert versus the Object, published by Oxford University Press. She's also working on the upcoming book, Painting Conservation, which will be published by Butterworth Press. And she's done a number of different articles on a variety of different subjects involving conservation, including emergency conservation, a new method in strip lining easel paintings, and an article concerning fire damage and smoke damage to art objects. She's a fellow both in the American Institute of Conservation and the International Institute of Conservation. She's served on numerous professional committees, as well as chairing the paintings specialty group at the American Institute of Conservation. And we have had a arrangement and relationship with her going back, I believe, almost 2 decades, almost from the very beginning when we were working on conserving the very first pieces in our collection. Rustin was there right at the very beginning. So it's with great pleasure that I now introduce Rustin Levenson.
Thank you, Peter. Wellesley. Hello, welcome to the conservation aspect of the Dali evening. What a conservator looks at is really the materials and the techniques of the painting. We think about how the painting was made. We think about what we're going to do, how that will affect the painting. We're thinking way to the future. We're thinking in the past, and we're looking very hard at the paintings. So I wanted to talk to you a little tonight about the materials and techniques of painting, how we know about Salvador Dali's materials and techniques, what we know so far, and about the work we've done this week in the galleries and last week. Salvador Dali was in awe of the old masters, and I think hopefully you can see this quote up here. I would allow my left hand to be cut off on the condition that I might for 10 minutes be able to observe Vermeer of Delft seated before his easel as he was painting. And sometimes conservators feel this way. If only I knew what he was thinking, what color he used, but we haven't given up our left hands yet. This spring I was at the Rijksmuseum, and they'd recently cleaned The Woman in Blue Reading a Letter by Johannes Vermeer. There was a technical exhibit, and this gives me a chance to tell Dali in absentia and you a little more about how conservators look at a painting. Where's my thing? This is ultraviolet examination, and there probably is a reason this isn't working, but I don't know what it is. All right, technical help here. I don't know. Peter, can you make this work, please? Oh, wait. So what I want to do is the pointer. The black thing? The silver thing? No. Well, you'll never know what I'm talking about. This is going to be so sad. Yeah, that's the button I was pushing.
It is.
All right.
I've got one next door.
All right, we're going to use the one next door. But meanwhile, We're looking at Johannes Vermeer, the way Dali would have liked to look at him. The ultraviolet examination shows some areas of damage. The greenish-yellow fluorescence here is fluorescence of resinous varnish, which you would expect on a Vermeer. Some of the resinous varnish has been removed, less fluorescence here, and there's retouches, and especially, do you see along the top, there's that purple as a retouch. So the restoration was quite extensive. Infrared is a long wavelength. Let's see if we can point with this. Oh yeah, yay! Infrared is a long wavelength that causes the underneath the surface of the painting to react characteristically, and you can actually see underdrawing in penimenti. And what no one knew before was that this, actually the coat, which everybody feels, is she pregnant? What's going on here? The coat was actually even bigger. Can you see the dark line there? And again in this detail. A radiograph, probably most of you have had a radiograph, an X-ray, a radiograph. And again, we can see, here you can see the dress and where he kind of changed his mind. The dense pigments show up the best in a radiograph, and this is what you're seeing here are the white lead and the confusing shape of the crossbars and the stretcher. And the nails. Nails are pretty good. We also use magnification to look at paintings. This Monet is an artist we work on quite a bit. He famously would paint his paintings, then take them inside, take them outside again. And when you look under the microscope, you can see that the layers don't stick together perfectly. He may have taken it inside and cooked a hamburger or something, and it got a little greasy, and so this doesn't stick. And because he uses the flickering of light in his paintings, you really don't notice until, in this case, the signature started disappearing, that the painting was flaking. And this micro-flaking is something we see quite often in Monet. We know about artists because of the materials they leave behind. In this case, William Glackens painted the head of Ira, his son, on the front of an old palette. This is a wonderful resource for conservators. You can see the pigments here. Every era has different elements in their pigments. While the vermilion may be the same pigment, the different elements that are used in the oil, the mold retardant, the things to extend it are all different. So there's really a thumbprint, chemical thumbprint of these colors. So if someone needs to do an authentication now of a William Glackens painting, they have this resource. We have labels, and this is my favorite. This is Mr. Careless will come and restore your painting, clean, and rehang it, so be careful. But the best is he took over from Mr. Sweet. So we went from sweet to careless. We know a lot about Dali's materials and techniques. Many people observed him painting, and he even wrote about painting in a book I'm going to show you. If you just look at his tabouret, you can see several bottles of liquid that he used to extend his paints. And this is what we're finding in the paintings, that different colors, different areas of the same color have different gloss. And this was something he obviously did intentionally because he had all these possibilities to alter the look of the paint as he applied it. And I'm going to tell you more about his brushes, too. This is his book. It's in the, I don't know how many of you have read it, but it's great. The 50 Secrets of Magic Craftsmanship. He wrote this in 1948, and of course the paintings we worked on this week are much later, but much of the information still applies. And you love what he says. Always he has a way of putting things that's interesting. When oil color is improperly handled, it is smeared on the canvas, stigmatized by a crude, repulsive opacity. But when used in the manner of the ancient Flemish painters, it has the hard consistency of a gem and takes on something of a glow. And we see this, of course, in all his paintings, and especially if you look under the microscope, it does just glow, these beautiful, the way he mixed this wet on wet, it looks solid and luminous. He talks about the 5 different kinds of brushes that you need to use to paint. And I took these photographs of brushes from our studio, these aren't his brushes, and tried to show you some examples of where he used these brushes. First, a flat square brush for underpainting to cover, spread, and build your foundation. And you can see the light blue that goes over the edge here. This would be the foundation that he would put on top of the ground layer of the paint. And in this case, it goes over the tacking margin. A round short brush for overpainting, supple for finer transparencies. And in this bust of Voltaire, you can see how transparently he's painted with the round short brush. An 1.5-inch long thin brush for liquid consistencies at the end of the painting. And Memory of a Child you can see how he used the brush almost to carve into the surface of the wet paint. A fan-shaped badger brush for blending. Apparatus at hand is a perfect example of this, where all the colors are so beautifully blended. A stipple brush for smoothing piteously uniform surfaces, such as skies. And here's the sky of the baigneuses. We see hairs in all Dali's paintings. He must not have spent very much on his brushes, or he must have used them very energetically, because the hairs fall out everywhere. Am I right, team? So this is the Ecumenical Council. Several were lost at once. A longer one in The Invisible Man. And this, we decided this is probably a cat hair. I don't know if he had a cat or not, but it sure looks like it. And it's painted right in, so whatever it came from, it was painted into the painting. He also says, for modeling in the imprimatura, neither pad nor brushes will suffice you, for you must use your fingers. It must be your little left finger. And here, when we took a morphological echo out of the frame, sure enough, right on the edge, you can see he was definitely using his little left finger. Many labels on Dali's paintings, very informative. This is a small painting, Invisible Man. Many of you know it from upstairs. And it has lots of labels. It's been to Philadelphia, it's been to Dusseldorf, it's been all over. But the best label is here, written in pencil, and I'm going to show you. It's a note from Mr. Morse. It stops my heart. Cleaned, 4/22/74, with Grumbacher number 578 restorer, A.H. Morse. And when he does these restorations, he exclaims, Lausdale. So at least we know what he did, and he meant well. To understand Dali's paintings and to understand any painting you look at in a museum, it's good to know how a painting is constructed and the materials of a painting. You have the support layer, the ground layer, the paint, and the varnish. The support layer is the base that holds the ground and the paint. And here's the corner of Ecumenical Council. Dali often used wood panels for his support, and this is the Ocell, and you can see on the easel in our Miami studio, you can see it's a thin panel that he used as the support. Most of his paintings, however, are on canvas, such as Morphological Echo. When we took Ecumenical Council out of its frame and looked at the back, we were able to see on the tacking margin, artists, what does it say? Artists all linen canvas. And this is a selvage edge, so it was cut out of a big piece of fabric. The stretchers on the Dalis are variable, and this is, I think, one of the most unusual. Again, on Invisible Man, the corners are almost constructed like furniture or dovetail drawer. It didn't do much for the front of the painting, but it's pretty cool from the back. This is one of my favorite supports. This is large plane trees by Van Gogh in the Cleveland Museum. This is actually painted on a red check tablecloth. And I don't know if you can see the checks there, and there's another one there. And he actually didn't put a ground down so you can see the red checks become part of the design. They actually found another painting on a red checked support in Munich. And they've decided that maybe it was panel curtains instead of a tablecloth, but I kind of like the tablecloth idea. The ground layer is the preparation layer for the paint that you put on the support that creates the absorbency and holds the paint layer. Most of Dali's paintings are what we call pre-primed or machine primed. That is, the canvas already has the ground on it when he puts it on the stretcher or when he buys it on the stretcher. You can tell this because the ground or the white layer here goes all the way over the edge to the edge of the canvas. If a painting is hand primed, the priming is only on the face of it. Why waste priming on the edges? Different color grounds are used by artists, and especially Spanish artists for a long time used red grounds. This Diego Velázquez, and I'm sorry the color isn't very good, but the whole painting is warmed by this red ground, which you can see in this detail on my computer. Underdrawings happen on the ground, and Dali did do underdrawings in India ink, in pencil, and in paint. This Andrea del Sarto from the Cleveland Museum is a wonderful example. And in this detail, you can see this figure is more evolved and more painted and blocked in. And the goat, I think it's a goat, over here is just drawn in. If you look at the Hallucinogenic Torreador in progress, you can see a lot of charcoal drawing here. In this part, you can see that the dots haven't been put on yet. The details down here aren't in yet. And her head, the halo, is not filled in. And at the top, you can actually see the arches he used for the underdrawing. They don't match at all, so he had a much different idea at one point of the size of the arches. He also, here's in the tie of the Torreador, see the line there? That would be an India ink underdrawing. It's fun to be up really close to these paintings. He also used perspective lines, and you can imagine in such a big painting, this is pretty important to figure out how you're going to design the perspective. And this is one of the lines. They're red lines, and there were also pinholes in the canvas used for perspective. The paint layer is the layer that we see, and it's the layer in which the artist's design is carried out. Painting used to be done before the Renaissance in tempera colors. Tempera colors dried very quickly, and you would be able to do perhaps one stroke at a time. And you can see in this Sanseverina how it's stroke by stroke by stroke. Well, this would never do for Dali, and his quote in the 50 Magic Secrets, "I do not consider that painting was authentically fully invented until the moment when the historic event of oil painting occurred." He never would have liked tempera. This Giacometto is the same year as the Sanseverino, and it's done in oil paint. And you can see immediately in this detail how the colors can be blended, how much you can do with oil paint. Conservators often say to each other that the Renaissance didn't have to do with enlightenment, it had to do with oil paint instead of tempera. Modern days, there are all kinds of paints. Jasper Johns encaustic paint, which is a wax-based paint. Of course, like in this Colescott, we have acrylic paint, which many artists use. Jackson Pollock, say no more. Artists had a lot of choices of pigments, and some of them are better than others. Van Gogh, as we know, wrote to his brother every day, and he wrote, "I've painted 2 pictures of irises, one on a yellow background and one on a pink background." We know the one on the yellow background. Oh, sorry. It's in Paris. You've probably seen it. Beautiful painting, beautiful yellow background. And when I worked at the Met, we had this irises on a white background. And we're thinking, why didn't he talk about that? You know, it's really a nice piece. When we took it out of the frame, and I don't have a picture of that, but we could see along the edges that it had been pink, and the paint had totally faded. So when you go to the Met and see this, say very loud, I think maybe the label says it now, so you can't be a smarty, but it is a pink background, so you almost don't know is it exhibitable because it's a very changed painting. When I was working at Harvard, they were very proud to get from Rothko these paintings in Harvard crimson. They took them up to where the famous Harvard people eat lunch in Holyoke Center, put them up, and when we were in his studio stretching the paintings, my chief conservator said, what kind of paint did you use? Because that's the question all conservators ask. And the answer was, I just went to the local 5 and dime and got paint. So she was upset. These are those paintings today. And they're in storage. You can see the storage racks. They're in storage at the Fogg Museum. They are not crimson anymore. And the neon colors also are a real problem. Keith Haring was a friend of ours, friend of the studio in New York, and this painting fell over when it was on its way to the dealer, and it got a ding up in the corner. So we called and said, just bring us the paint you use, because if we match it, your paint's going to travel far in color from what we put there with our more permanent colors. It was a week later, he brought the paint over, it didn't match after a week, so there. But Salvador Dali knew this, and in his book he has a list of colors unsuitable for artistic painting. And I don't know, it's pretty small print, but if you can read it, it's a very long list. He was pretty picky, but he knew his colors and he knew about pigments. He was a master technician, and I think this is something people don't really appreciate about Dali, his technical ability. And many of these, like the Carmen Lake, is what Sir Joshua Reynolds used, that fade so that his people die on the canvas before they die in real life. The varnish layer is the final layer that saturates the paint layer. Starting in the beginning of the 20th century, artists were more particular about having their paintings varnished. And this George Braque painting says, interdiction de Vermeer, forbidden to varnish this painting. Well, someone did. I guess they didn't speak French. And you can see this is where we would remove the varnish. And look what a difference it made. He knew that the varnish would stick in all the impasto. We use sand to texture his paint, and that you wouldn't be able to read it at all. It just looks blotchy instead of textured. So if you see a painting that says interdiction de Vermeer, don't varnish it. That's what it means. There are varnish on quite a few of Dali's paintings, and varnish is something he used in his medium as well, so that makes his paintings very difficult to clean. You can see just from the gloss on this that there's a varnish on the painting. So now that we know about the structure of paintings, I'm going to tell you a little about some of the conservation treatments, focusing on the treatments that I've done for the museum here. But I want to first read this quote by Dali. "We are all alike in safeguarding the famous painting as our most precious and proudest heritage." And I think the Salvador Dali Museum agrees with this, because this is their mission statement. Joan sent it to me. And here it says right there, the Salvador Dali Museum shall preserve the paintings. So, and it's an important mission of many museums. I think on Saturday there's going to be a conference here of people from museums around the area, and they're going to talk about preservation and conservation, an important focus. In 100 years we want this art to be here, even if we're not. So some of the treatments we do: removal of surface grime. This is the average bureaucrat in our studio in Miami. We also remove the varnish, and you can see, maybe not too well because the slide is discolored. A lot of the retouches we found on his paintings have discolored. We think they're possibly oil, but they really vary from the color of the painting. And I don't think they were put on that color, so that's what makes me think it's an oil painting. Varnish removal is one of the more dramatic things that happens in a conservation lab. And I don't know how many of you saw the Kadakis painting before, but you can see the color that comes off the painting. If you imagine putting on glasses that were that color and looking at the art around you, you get quite a different view, which is the reason we removed the varnish. There we go. You can see as the varnish comes off, this is pretty discolored. And even in the details, varnish removal makes a huge difference. You can see the varnish, once it gets caught in all these interstices, it changes the whole way the stroke looks. Here it just jumps right up and improves enormously. We repair tears. This is again in Kadakis. Here's Veronica doing a lining. Lining is something we haven't had to do to any Dali paintings, but I thought I'd have this slide to explain to you. Lining is when you actually attach a painting to a second canvas to give it auxiliary support. We luckily haven't had to do this to many of the 20th century paintings that we've encountered, but eventually the canvas does degrade to an extent that you do have to do something to support it. We've designed all kinds of intermediary treatments that we hope will forestall a lining. But people always say, when you scrape the canvas off the back, isn't that hard? Well, we never scrape the canvas off the back. So if you read that on the internet, they're making that up. Sometimes it happens, but very, very rarely. We have a canvas in the Miami studio that the cockroaches ate the canvas off. That wasn't our fault. Strip lining is something we do a lot, and that just is lining the edges of the painting. It helps you to stretch it without straining the painting. It gives you extra fabric to work with on the perimeter. Often the tacking edges have damaged nail holes, and this helps to support them. Loose lining is when you mount a painting over an auxiliary support. So in this case, we put PCAP, which is a fine fabric, over the stretcher, and then we're going to stretch the painting over it. So even though it's not attached, you can imagine the secondary fabric gives a lot of support to the top one. Here's Kelly restretching over a loose lining. This is this Eucharistic still life. I don't know if you can see it in there. Patching helps a canvas live a little longer. In this case, there was an old patch on the Kadakis that we removed and then put a new thinner, more attractive patch on. We get a lot of questions about retouching during the time we've been working in the studio. This is a 17th century painting from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And it gives me a chance to explain to you a little more about retouching. People always say you have to be an artist to do retouching, but what you're really doing is matching the area all around. We only retouch over the loss, and as you can see, you don't have to be an artist to match that or that or that, and then lift some of the staining. And Ralph in my New York studio did this. He's not here to take credit, but there he is after. So it wasn't artistic. It's just being able to match colors and see what colors to use. Sometimes retouching is a little more challenging, like with the baigneuses, where much of the sand and shells had fallen away. You can see big gaps there. And we actually used watercolors to retouch and make little tiny shells that gave the impression of the shells in the other area. And now I know you're going to all go up and look and see if you can tell which are the shells we made up. I don't think you can find them, but maybe. This is after treatment. And now a little bit about the treatment of the Masterworks. This has been quite an effort. We've had 99 conservation days on this in the space of 2 weeks with an amazing team of people. The first week we treated Discovery of America and the Ecumenical Council. And these are both up on the wall now, and hopefully you'll be able to see these in all their splendor. We worked on them on the wall because it's easier to reach the middle. But sometimes we have to work to reach the middle. This had a split stretcher. You can see these splits along the stretcher. The stretcher is really not strong, so we've glued the stretcher, and we actually had measured and made a splint in Miami that we attached to the damaged crossbar. So at some point in the old building there was a leak, and this mold is the result of that leak. Treatment of mold is complicated because you're never sure you can get it all. Luckily, the climate in the museum is really good, and one of the things that discourages mold growth is to have relative humidity below 55, which they do. So we're hopeful. This mold was dried out, and we're hopeful it won't regrow, but we did treat it locally. And we had to release it from the stretcher. These are push pins, a conservator's best friend this week. And the push pins hold the canvas. We've taken out the nails, and they hold the canvas while we reach underneath and treat the mold. We also flattened some distortions. This is one of the techniques we use. These are the heavy magnets, the heavy earth magnets. And on the back we have a metal plate, and on the front we have the magnets that hold this flat overnight to try and encourage the distortions to go away. We use a little of everything. That's this one. I don't know what he's doing in here. What? That's not really the end of the slideshow. I don't know how we got there. I bet you want to know about all these slides, but I'm not going to tell you. All right, if you stay after, I'll tell you. No, you'll know everything by the time I'm done. I guess I accidentally went to the end. Okay, now we're back where we were. We treated the mold, we flattened the distortions. There was a long drip going down the painting from something that happened. And here you can see the drip has now disappeared. Retouching is done, again, with special paints that are made for conservators. They're paints that are in a clear, reversible resin, and they're pure pigments rather than a lot of fillers, which make it easy for us to mix the colors. Here's Annie doing a retouch. And here he is after treatment. He looks even better upstairs. Ecumenical Council posed different problems. Ecumenical Council was on a very flimsy stretcher, and we had to replace that stretcher during last week. I put these slides up to show you how much you can see about Dali's technique when you're close up. This is the very thin paint that we talked about earlier, and here you can see he has the undercolor, and then this is a second layer he put on to punch up the color to make that area more dimensional. One of the main problems with Ecumenical Council was tears from the old nail holes on the tacking margin, and these came around the face of the painting. It was stretched unevenly. There was more white at the top and more on the opposite side at the bottom. So it was stretched as a parallelogram rather than as a rectangle. This is the old stretcher, which I'm sure they're going to save, maybe. Before surface cleaning, we undertake testing. Every color is tested, every area is tested. And you can see in this where this area has been cleaned and this area still has surface grime on it. I think you can see that. These are our swabs. So again, you're looking through a filter that color when you're looking at this painting. We did a strip lining, as I described earlier, and we flattened the distortions. We're very proud of our weights. And we did do a little acrobatics. Here's Leah fixing a patch in the middle of the painting. Dirk helped us fashion scaffolding, and Shad held her feet while she patched a hole that had occurred during the loan to Australia. We repaired the holes in the tacking margin, and you can see how many there were. These are the repaired, and these are going to be repaired. Again, with the push pins, we stretched and restretched it to get it to be a rectangle rather than a parallelogram. Here's an area of an old damage by the corner, And this is after we've retouched it. This is before. And the painting is now up after treatment. And I hope you can see this. Before, you didn't really get the sense that the dove was flying out of the painting, but now when you go up, you really see him three-dimensionally coming at you. I'm just going to call this DNA painting because I didn't go to the class where they taught you how to say it. This one is finished and it's going to be put up tomorrow morning, so if you're in the museum tomorrow, you'll see it. Came out really beautifully. This was the only painting that hadn't been varnished by Bonfoys in the 70s in Cleveland, and it reacted very differently. Although when I tested it on site, just in a few places, I felt we could clean it. Once we did our thorough testing, we realized it wasn't appropriate to clean the painting. One, it was too sensitive, and two, it really hadn't been varnished. And so the different glosses and the different layering that Dali did are still what he wanted you to see. You can see some underdrawing here, but when I show you the ultraviolet photograph, you can really see a lot of underdrawing coming up. And you can see where he went in with another color after the spheres were painted, and again made an adjustment that changed the way that area would look. And it's these areas that were on top that were more sensitive. And you can just picture him walking back and just looking at his palette and just taking something redder. So we cleaned it with dry methods. Here they are doing that. When we were looking at the painting, looking through the painting with transmitted light, that means someone holding a light over the painting and someone lying on the floor underneath on Dirk's crawler, you can see there's a lot of weaknesses in the canvas. We decided to treat those with an adhesive to stabilize the areas and to strengthen the canvas in those areas. And there were also distortions in these areas. And here you can see Annie shining the light, and maybe Debbie under the table there, Kelly under the table there, doing the consolidation. The Hallucinogenic Torreador is almost done. Tomorrow morning we're doing the last part of it, and it's really come up nicely. Again, as I showed you before, there's a lot of underdrawing. Dali painted this over 15 months, and it took him a long time to decide how to fit the face of the Torreador in and the Venus from the pencil boxes that inspired him. So he adjusted again and again through photographs and drawings. And so we found this to be problematic when we started cleaning it. It was the dustiest of the paintings, and we feel this is probably because of its placement where there was a lot of traffic. You can see this. And here you can see the dust on the brush, and you can see the areas that have been dusted. So, housekeeping. When we do the cleanings of the works, we divide them up. We just hang strings in them because there are 4 or 5 people working on each piece, and we want to be sure we cover every area. And the strings don't mean you have to clean in the squares, but it helps you keep track of where you've cleaned and where you've been. So we hung our strings on this and then realized that Dali had suggested to Luis Romero that in order to study his work as a whole through the hallucinogenic Torreador, it would be better to divide it into parts. Hence, I decided to parcel it out into 12 square meter plots. So we didn't do 12 square meter, although this morning we did do that for fun. But that's what the strings were, and I know some of you that saw the strings hanging there while we were working wondered, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? This is the testing, and the solvent, the aqueous solution, I thought would work. Initially, you can see took off less than the second solution we used, the EDTA. So we decided to use this for cleaning the painting. And again, we got spectacularly dirty swabs. But we did find, as we were testing each area we were working in, that some areas were sensitive. And as we looked at it, we realized, like with the DNA, that it was the areas that he had painted later, and this is our little map that we made as we were working. The areas he had painted later were the areas that were the most sensitive. So he may have varnished his work. We know that he painted in Spain. It came to America for an exhibition. It went back to Spain and was painted again. So these, we're assuming, were some of the later editions that are on top of whatever coating he put on and are more sensitive. So this took us a little longer than we thought. So this weekend, check the galleries for after-treatment views of the DNA and the hallucinogenic Torreador. A lot of people ask about conservation training. This is my daughter, Gaddis, who was working with me. Now she's a little older than that. Conservation training is a long process. You have your bachelor's degree, and you take a lot of courses in art history and chemistry, and also in some kind of art that shows that you have manual dexterity. Then you do an internship or an apprenticeship. After that, you apply to graduate school, and it's 2, 3, 4 years. And then after that, internships before you become a qualified conservator. So she had her own painting that I think she worked on for about 15 years. And I don't even want to look at it, but she liked to be in there with us. Anyway, I just want to thank everyone here. The staff of the museum was wonderful to us. The National Endowment of the Arts, we couldn't have done it without you, nor the keeper of the Masterworks. And especially thank you to my team. And if you applaud, they'll all stand up. Yay! They had different ideas about what varnish would do. Rubens wrote a letter to Queen Isabella when he sent her the paintings saying, put them in a closet and then bring them out and put them in the sun and the varnish will become clear again. So I don't know how that would have happened, but that was his impression that it was possible. So I think, no, I don't think they painted anticipating that. Yes? Well, when there's a tear, we actually reweave it. So we match every thread up, and if the threads are frayed, we retwist them to make them back into solid threads again. And then working under magnification, we reattach them, and it depends. There's a textile welding powder we use sometimes, or different adhesives, depending on the fabric. With the Dali paintings, we didn't. They already have, 3 of them already have a varnish, and 1 we're not sure should be varnished. And the fire marshal wouldn't let us in any case because you can imagine it's pretty nasty. And the visitors wouldn't have liked it either.
Do the swabs have any special material to lift up the grime and the dust on them, or are they just natural cotton?
They're natural cotton, but we use the solution, the cleaning solution on them. But
Mr. Clean?
We make them different sizes depending on what area we're working on.
Right.
We twist them ourselves with the cotton that comes off a roll. So depending on what we're doing or where we're working, and how much absorbency we need, and it's really...
No, the swabs have, that's, the amount of absorbency depends on the size of the swab and the area that you're working on, or do you limit that area and then create the swab for that? I'm sorry to be a pain in the neck, but I'm
trying to think of how
curious.
to answer that. I think it depends on the opacity of the painting, the kind of varnish, the solution you're using,
Wow.
how it evaporates. I mean, there's so many
Some
factors, and it's
factors.
funny because as a conservator, I don't always think of all the factors. It's after a while you develop kind of an instinct. Oh, this area, I'm just going to make a little tight swab. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I think we
I'll
have one
never
over
look at a
here.
Johnson swab doing my ears quite the same.
You're not supposed to do that. It says right on the box.
Wait, don't leave me. No. Rustin, if I heard you correctly, I believe you mentioned pinholes in the canvas. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
And could you please explain again? I'm not exactly sure. Was Dali using them as markers?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
could you talk please
If
just a
you
little bit
look-
about that?
Look really closely at the dots over the bull's neck, and in every dot you'll see a pinhole that he used to make his web. And sometimes on the back we'll stabilize them a little so the canvas won't fray, but they're quite precise. So, yeah, you'll see them. Yes, but we don't fill them up because they're part of the piece. Yeah. There's
Right
some
here.
people. Oh yes.
Right
okay.
here, Ms. Levenson. How old would you say is the oldest painting that you have restored successfully? And my second part of that question, is there any work of art that you feel is beyond repair, that you can't do anything about it?
Maybe the one the cockroaches ate the back of. It's a Gustave Courbet. It's a nice piece, but we're working on it. I think we've made some progress. The oldest one, I have one in the studio now that's from 1584. That was, it's the head of the casket of Menendez, who founded St. Augustine, Florida, and it's painted, and it's very thick wood. But when I worked at the Met, we reinstalled the Italian gallery, so we worked on a lot of early Italian paintings, Giovanni de Paolo, Sassetta, like that. So,
Thank you.
Trecento,
Okay, and back here.
yes.
I'd like to ask you two things. Can you tell us, please, like what you found as the top one or two most personally rewarding restorations that you have participated in? And the other thing I'd like to know is, for those fortunate to own original works of art, what do or don't suggestions would you make for those people to preserve them? Thank you.
Okay. You really are so absorbed in what you're working on that it almost always what you're working on is your favorite. I think that's true. This week we were all completely intrigued and looking in the library and Joan brought up a bunch of books for us and looking at details and pointing things out to each other, and there's a real excitement of discovery to every painting you're working on. So it's like your children, you don't really have a favorite. And the second question, if you own art yourself, obviously don't try and do anything to it in terms of cleaning or, you know, if it's not flaking, you might be able to dust it, but if it is flaking and you dust it, you're going to brush the paint right off. So, or if there's some instability in her layer, so we kind of don't recommend that. It's better to be dirty than be damaged. The dirt is corrosive, and eventually it's good to have a conservator take the dirt off. But here in St. Petersburg, you have a lot of salt water. There's salt in the humidity, and that does get on the paintings. And bug droppings and all kinds of things that happen in a home that can be damaging to a painting. And there's one back there and one up here. Go ahead. Well, hmm I think
Also,
the treatment.
Rustin, also, could you just repeat that question?
Okay. Curious about the effect of light on oil paintings and how in a home. The treatment to the window glass that you mentioned is really crucial because that treatment filters out the ultraviolet light, which is the highest wavelength light, the most energy, therefore the most damaging. And that's something that most homes now that are built with the hurricane glass have that kind of filtering. Although I was just in a house in Hilton Head that had hurricane glass, and when I read my light meter right in front of their Rothko, it was really high. So I think you really want to protect your oil paintings. The list of pigments that Salvador Dali felt were inappropriate are mostly because they're fugitive. And if those pigments are in your painting, those will be affected and the colors and the balance will change. So it's best not to have too much light. It's hard for me to say to someone, well, you live in this house, keep your windows shut, keep your curtains down, you know. But you have to balance it. And certainly if you're not using a room, if you're not in the living room all day, leave the curtains closed. It makes a big difference. In the back? I'm going to let them choose.
Microphone at all times.
I had a question for you. The larger paintings, did you see the golden ratio guide that Dali had underneath it? Did he draw that in, or did he just have like a separate?
You couldn't see enough of it to see if that's what it was.
Okay.
You could just see some of the lines and know that's what they probably were.
All right. I was just curious as if they were like drawn in first, you know. So,
Yeah.
all right. Thank you.
Yes, you did show one slide that one of the paintings had mold on the back, and that is such a damaging issue, mold, in many textiles and a lot of other things in your home. What was the process for removing the mold on that painting? What chemical do you use on that?
Luckily, the mold was not active anymore. So we cleaned the area we have a special HEPA vacuum cleaner with special controls on it. It's all special, right? So we vacuumed it, and then we brushed into the vacuum to remove any loose material. The canvas was stained by it, but the canvas seemed to be very intact. After that, we used an ethanol solution with some inhibitor in it. But yeah, you have to be careful not to get mold on your paintings. If you have your painting against a wall, it's good to go Home Depot and buy one of those bumpers that they put on chairs. And if you space your painting away from the wall, there's much less chance that you'll create a microclimate behind and get mold on the back. Cheap and easy.
I understand that in the Ecumenical Council, Dali slapped an octopus against the canvas. Is that an urban legend? And if it isn't, did you have any particular problems with mollusk mucus?
We didn't see any. We didn't see any. We know exactly what that area where the area is, and it was pretty much like the rest of the painting. So. Probably it's a good legend. But.
Any
Yes, on the subject of color, going back to the early paintings you've done, and then more modern works, how do you color match exactly, or as close as you can? I'm very curious about that.
It's experience. It's experience. Just learn to do it. Once you know the color wheel, then that's the start. And as you're looking at the color you're trying to match, you're just subconsciously thinking cooler, lighter, darker, greener, hotter, and that's how. No. It's visual.
Let's see, we're just about at the end. Are there any final questions? Any? Oh, okay. One final question, Rustin. That okay?
Hi, you may have covered this. I didn't hear it. Modern day artists are now painting on just about any surface. For example, wood, formica, or whatever. Would the conservation approach be the same? Or would they bother to, I mean, this is talking about in the future, of course. Would the approach to conserve something on a non-canvas painting be the same?
We just restored a Keith Haring on fiberglass that was painted. And it's dealing with paint. You might use different adhesives to secure things if there was flaking. And to be sure your retouches would stick, you might do something a little different for an underlayer, but it's similar. If it wanders too far away from paint on a surface, then there's a specialist called object conservators, and we cheerfully turn it over to them.
Well, with that, Rustin, thank you very much for your generosity. And thank you all for coming tonight.